Meadowlarks, written by Paul Olaf Sveen. Chapter 1. My mom, Eva Lischka Sveen, was in the 24th carat of her golden years when she moved into assisted living from her apartment. That apartment was the only place that she had ever lived alone, not in her 20-odd years in Saskatchewan and not in her 60 years in Alberta. Well, Mom wasn't exactly alone in that apartment. She had brought her cat with her from the house she'd owned, a painted by Pollock, scared of its own shadow kind of cat. Scared of everything, really, except Mom. It was a calico. Mom struggled for a name and, in the end, simply came up with calico. As a farm girl, Mom invented a language she used in the back 40 to speak to horses, cows, and even her brothers. And now, calicosis. That was her go-to name for it, calicosis. It sounded more like a rash than a pet. Mom's animal language was a series of whistles, grunts, and clicks. Something you'd swear you'd heard on hee-haw. Depending on the sound made, calicosis would either sprint to her, drop where it stood, or hide like the Gestapo had just broken down the door. Calicosis was a social outcat, and looking back, maybe the cat was mirroring how Mom felt. Worried, on edge, trying to adjust to an ever-changing, uncertain life. Speaking of home, Mom told a story about visiting a neighboring farm at Christmas when she and her brother were younger. They were on a horse-drawn sleigh when they were suddenly caught in a blizzard. The horse stopped in the whiteout, refusing to budge. Her brother reefed on the reins and shouted, trying to get it to move. Freezing, Mom grabbed the reins and used her invented farm language. The horse's ears flickered. It hurt her. It turned in the storm and carried them within a few feet of the barn. Her brother had been going in the wrong direction. Mom both knew and loved animals, and she believed that their horse would never forget the way home, even in a blinding, freezing blizzard. Drastic changes began when Mom moved from the hamlet of Steelman, Saskatchewan to the booming city of Edmonton, Alberta in 1963. That day, she crammed us 5 kids into Dad's 1960 blue Ford Monarch. She stuffed as much of our belongings as she could into the trunk, or tied it to the roof like the Clampetts. Then Mom left everything and everyone she knew behind, all to support my dad's dream of playing the accordion. I can't imagine how heartbroken Mom must have been leaving Steelman. She was literally family to everyone there. Her mom and dad, brothers and sisters, uncles, aunts, cousins. Everyone in Steelman knew Mom, and they knew her better than anyone anywhere. But Dad wanted off the tractor to record polkas, and quite frankly, who could blame him? Dad drove away, and Steelman waved goodbye. And knowing Mom, she cried as everyone she loved got further and further away, until she could no longer see them. Mom and Dad eventually bought a house in Edmonton. The bungalow was like the Beatles, because we also had one John. With 7 of us and 1 bathroom, it was the reason I sprinted to school. Mom hung clothes outside in January, which we wore frozen to church. And it was also where Dad celebrated the 32 albums he recorded, and where my parents celebrated their 50th anniversary. Chapter 2. Mom faced the move from her home the way she faced everything else, in quiet, traumatic shock. In her heart, she was unwavering. She tore her clothes apart to make dresses for my sisters, and worked tirelessly to make ends meet. Mom was the shining beacon of a home with 5 out-of-control kids, and a husband who stayed out late playing accordion classics like Boil That Cabbage Down. Dad got up early to teach music downtown, and then played for local dances or drove for hours in a car that probably shouldn't have been more than a wrench away from a mechanic. Dad was relentless, writing new polka hits to record, or writing articles for local accordion magazines, nationally and internationally. He dealt with the pressure by hanging out with his ne'er-do-weller accordion buddies. They drank, ate pickled herring, and played Scottishies late on school nights. They laughed about the old days, while Mom cleaned and worked over a hot stove, making sure that Dad and his cronies had good eats from the old country. The years flew by. Dad was in end-of-life care, and Mom had her own health issues. When I was away for work, my wife, Nernie, would do the grocery shopping, would pick up Mom's meds, and sat with her. But the day came when Mom had to leave her beloved house. Her kitchen, her flowers, her apple trees, and the 2 massive trees in the front yard. They were just saplings when Mom planted them. Everything Mom grew was chosen because it reminded her of Steelman, and also for the birds it would attract. The blue jays, finches, woodpeckers, swallows, and the hummingbirds. But they never attracted my mom's favorite bird from growing up in Saskatchewan, the meadowlark. Mom told more farm stories about meadowlark than any other. It was during Mom's looming retirement that she had even more to face. She was diagnosed with colon cancer and fitted with a colostomy pouch. I seriously doubt Mom ever realized how difficult her life truly was. She survived unending hardships as if trapped in a perpetual storm, but she chose not to run. Instead, she became the bright blue sky in the center of the hurricane. She faced everything, no matter how overwhelmed she was, with her fierce Eva resolve. Mom never quit. She would flick the Lischka switch and stare down whatever she had to face. Then she would pray that tomorrow might be better. It was a few years after Mom moved from her apartment into assisted living that she was swept into yet another storm. She was diagnosed with late-onset dementia. When it rains, it rains. Chapter 3. This particular afternoon, I visited Mom. I stepped off the elevator as usual with our Shar-Pei, Ruby. I let our wrinkled dog off the leash, and like all the other times, Ruby was immediately met with uncountable hugs and kisses from the nurses. After the staff visit, Ruby made her rounds through the common area. She started with the spryest of the elders, and then worked her way slowly towards those who were alone. Those seniors, Ruby would simply plop beside and lean in. I stepped toward Mom's suite and paused in the open doorway. I was watching the angel who raised me, but for some reason that day, the most fearless person I knew seemed broken. She was in faded blue sweats. I smiled when I noticed how the room's light fell on her, making Mom's gray hair look like a halo. She sat on the edge of the bed, hunched over a small table covered in her art. She had taken painting classes years ago and created several Christmas scenes, along with a colorful painting of wild meadow flowers. Her paintings are in my office now, along with the sun hat she wore while working in her yard. I'm looking at Mom's wildflower painting as I write this, and I'll never forget Mom's story about it. How she stopped in a meadow on her way to school. She lit up when she told it, as if she were sharing the happiest moment of her life, and just for a moment, living in it again. The lines and wrinkles around Mom's eyes and mouth spoke of years of exhausting work. Her stressed lines clashed with the lines carved by a bottomless laugh. If you knew Eva Sveen, you knew her loving scowl was her go-to move. Now, don't get me wrong, Mom smiled. But when she had her druthers, she went straight to her belly laugh. A sound that, if you heard it, you shan't soon forget. Mom was my best friend, even when she was beating me with a broom. But now her memories were unreachable. That didn't matter to me, though. She was my mom, my champion, my hero, my storyteller. At the kitchen table or under the shade of the apple trees, spinning glorious yarn after yarn about her childhood near Steelman. She'd say something, and then pause and glare at me with that scowl of hers, making sure that I kept up. Don't worry, though. All of Mom's stories are in the vault. What I've come to understand is this. In every story she ever told me, you could take the girl out of Steelman, Saskatchewan, but you could nary take Steelman, Saskatchewan out of that girl. Farm stories were Mom's wheelhouse. She told them any chance she could. One thing always confused me, though. If it was such a happy time, why in the few pictures of Mom when she was a farm girl, did she always appear in the fringes of the frame, concealing her smile. Thin, frail, looking tired, her shoulders sunk. Probably because she was up at dawn, working long hours on the farm until dark. Then Mom spotted the high plains drifter leaning in the doorway. "Who are you?" she asked, sounding confused. "I'm an artist," I replied. I may have changed my title every visit. Pilots, cowboys, celebrity chefs, and kings. An artist? "Well, so am I," she said, suddenly sounding excited. "Would you like to see some of my sketches?" she asked. "Absolutely," I smiled. She paused and pointed towards the small closet. "First, could you check on the roast in the oven?" I nodded and opened the closet door. The shelves were filled with folded clothes. I put on a glove, reached in, and carefully lifted out the imaginary hot pan. "Oh, it smells wonderful," I said, closing that oven door. "Another 20 minutes or so." "Good," she said. "Then you can stay for supper." "I'd like that," I said. Before I sat down, I checked on Ruby. Our dog was by a table of seniors, tail wagging, moving from one new friend to another. I shook my head in wonder. How did Nernie and I manage to get such an amazing dog? I told Nernie it was because we got Ruby from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. Not bragging, just saying. Anyways, I stepped back to Mom. Mom was an incredible cook. She went to college in her 30s and earned diplomas in both sous chef and pastry arts. She could make Western barbecue, Chinese cuisine, Saskatchewan flapper pies, Norwegian lutefisk, Swedish potato dumplings, Danish flake pastry, German spätzle and schnitzel, cream cheese apple strudels, Ukrainian cabbage rolls, and pierogies. A mom cooking story in a bite. She told stories about sitting by the radio with my Grandpa Joe listening to the World Series, or how her mother worked her the hardest, or when she got a job as a telephone operator and talked to my dad for the first time. And always, the story about the meadow flowers near her childhood home. I checked the roast again, and Mom asked me to grab a pile of her paintings from the windowsill. I placed them in front of her. She flipped through them slowly, stopping on one. A brown counter and cupboards, a silver sink, a fridge and stove, a window with blue curtains, a watercolor, its colors bleeding gently into one another. It was Mom's kitchen, in her house. "I love this painting," I said. "It makes me feel safe." I studied it, then glanced at the cupboard. One of Mom's cooking stories bubbled up in me, the story I promised earlier. It was a Friday Thanksgiving weekend, sometime late in the 80s. I was home when the phone rang. It was Mom, Mother dearest. She was calling from her job as a chef at a banquet hall. "You know where I work?" Her tone was a little too brisk for my constitution, thank you very much. "Yes, I've driven you there enough times. Are you okay?" "Be here in half an hour. Park your truck at the back doors." Click. "Okay," I said to no one in particular. When did Mom become a Marine? I get to the banquet hall and back up to the doors. They slam open and Mom motions me in like she's calling in an artillery strike. I hop out and scamper into the kitchen. "The banquet manager said anything left after supper I could share with the staff," she said. "The rest is ours, so load it into your truck. Chop, chop." Turkeys, hams, mashed potatoes, salmon, stuffing, gravy, mushroom sauce, cranberries, pies, cakes, butter tarts, puddings, fresh baked bread, and so much more. All wrapped and good to go. I grabbed a turkey and a tub of pies and loaded them into the truck. Mom worked the dining area while I filled it. Dad slept through the whole thing. Then Mom heated up a couple of plates. And the best part wasn't the food, no. The best part was sitting with my mom, late at night, eating early Thanksgiving supper. While she told more stories, it's a memory I'll never forget. Mom flipped through more paintings, stopping on an orange ball with whiskers, big ears, and a way too long tail that curled around its tukas thrice. "Who's the kitty in the painting?" I asked. Mom didn't answer. She just stared at it, slowly moving her thumb over the cat's whiskers. I thought it might be Ginger, another stray that had found its way into her yard one day. That cat ended up having kittens in the basement. It carried them up the stairs one at a time and placed them in Mom's lap. And Mom just cried over that. What is it with my mom and animals? They all loved her. Horses, cats, dogs, Dad. I glanced over at Mom. She was still staring at the painting. I got up and checked the roast again, closed the closet door, then went to look for Ruby. She was sitting beside a near catatonic senior on a gurney, staring up at the ceiling. His arm was draped over the side, his hand gently patting and scratching at her. I sat back down next to Mom as she flipped through more paintings. I could tell she was tired, and I thought about letting her rest. Then I realized she wasn't looking at the paintings anymore. She was blinking towards the door. I looked as well, and in the doorway sat Ruby. Mom stared at the dog, bewildered. After a long silence, something shifted. A light that seemed to return to her eyes. She glanced at Ruby again, and then slowly turned to me and whispered, "Paul?" I coughed. Tears welled in my eyes. Mom had said my name. She had remembered me. My mom remembered me. How? Why? Was it the love of animals? Did Ruby reach something deep inside her that nothing else could? "Yes, Mom, it's me, your son, Paul," I said. "Oh, Paul," she beamed. Ruby waddled over and sat on Mom's foot, leaning into her. Mom ran her hand over Ruby, whispering softly to her, and we had stayed another half an hour. Mom hugged me, then she laid down for a sleep. Ruby watched as I covered her with a blanket. I took one last look, and then Ruby and I left. With my dog at my side and my ears full of silence, and somehow an ear-to-ear grin I couldn't hold back, Mom had remembered me. Chapter 4. It was not long after that my mom passed away. I again found myself holding her painting of the wildflowers, remembering the story she'd told me about her childhood. It was, as I recalled, an incredible, synchronous mom story. I was working in southern Saskatchewan, not far from Steelman. I visited relatives and then drove down a gravel road towards the highway. I quickly happened upon an abandoned one-room schoolhouse overgrown with trees. I had no idea if it was Mom's old schoolhouse. She'd spoken so much about it. I turned off my car and decided to walk around the old one-room school. For my mom, of course. It was then that I remembered my voice recorder. I was a stand-up comedian and used it to record my shows. It had an hour of tape on it. I pressed record and placed it on the roof of my car and wandered around the old schoolhouse. I wanted to believe it was the school my mom went to. I looked inside, and there were a few tipped-over desks. I imagined my mom when she was a little girl, sitting in one of those desks, her whole life ahead of her. I took some pictures with my phone, and after a while stepped back to my car. I sat in my vehicle and checked my voice recorder. It had stopped, but that means it had recorded an hour of something. I plugged in my earphones and started the drive home, just like the ones my parents had made in 1963. At first, the recording was just prairie wind, lonely, empty. But then near the very end, I heard a bird flutter, scratch, scramble across the roof of my car. And then, as if prompted by something beyond explanation, the bird leaned into the voice recorder and sang. Chills ran down my back. It was a meadowlark. I knew that song anywhere. Mom had done meadowlark impressions my whole life, especially when she told her wildflower stories. I knew that song only because of her. After an all-night drive, I finally made it back to Edmonton. When I woke up, I went straight to Mom's house. She was at the kitchen table having coffee. I told her I had something I needed her to hear. I fast-forwarded the tape almost to the very end. I turned the recorder up as loud as it would go and pressed play. Mom heard the Saskatchewan wind gusts and seemed very unimpressed. But then she heard it, a bird trundling across the roof of my car, and with all its heart, singing. Mom looked like she'd been struck by lightning. She pressed the recorder against her ear, listening again and again as she cried. "You recorded a meadowlark," she sobbed, tears streaming down her face. She played the tape so often that I eventually gave her the entire voice recorder. I told her about the abandoned schoolhouse where I had recorded it. I printed off a picture of that old school. Mom stared at the one-room school, overgrown with trees. "That's my school. It has to be. That's my school." What a glorious moment to share with my mom. Chapter 5. At Mom's funeral, I thought of her meadow painting again, the one that held her favorite story. The way that she had cried when she heard the meadowlark on the voice recorder. I knew then it was something I could only call a miracle. What were the odds that I would stumble into Mom's old schoolhouse and record a meadowlark at the very same time? It was in that moment that I decided to close my eyes and imagine where Mom would be right at this moment. I thought about this. In the eternal moment, after Mom had closed her eyes for the very last time, I pictured she was a girl again, skipping barefoot down a dirt road on a perfect spring day. She was wearing a white t-shirt and a blue dress with shoulder straps. And she had a small bag that she would swing around that held her lunch and her school books. She stepped through an open gate and into the rolling hills of the meadow. The girl danced through endless wildflowers, gathering the brightest and most colorful among them for her teachers. Crocuses, cornflowers, prairie roses, violets, blue flax, red lilies, scarlet paintbrushes. She laid down among the flowers, her eyes closed and breathing in the peaceful prairie air. Somewhere in a distant thought, she wondered if she should head towards the schoolhouse before the bell rang, but the thought drifted away. And then she heard it, the heavenly song of a meadowlark. She had opened her eyes, and her face broke into a smile. The meadowlark came closer, its song echoing across the vast meadow. For a moment, she couldn't remember ever being this happy before. This must be a special day. Even the sky seemed to bow above her, wide, clear, and endless blue. The wildflowers leaned towards her in a brilliant late April color. Everything felt like it was listening. And then the meadowlark landed, so gently, and sang only for her. "Where am I?" the little girl wondered aloud. And then a voice, carried on the breeze of the prairie air, answered her softly, "Eva, my child, you are home."